All right, welcome back. In today's lecture, we're going to be looking at Module 32, Expressing and Experiencing Emotions. And so this is kind of a build off of Module 31, where we look at the physiology and kind of what are the key aspects that create emotion. This is going to be the point where we're looking at kind of why do they show up when they show up, and how and why are they useful to us potentially, especially in social circumstances. So, as always, if you want to follow along with the chapter or the module, it begins on page 375 in our book. So if you want to follow along that way, I'd recommend actually today going, if you have the PowerPoint, awesome. You can find them in D2L. But I also recommend looking in the book. There's going to be some stuff in the book that is worth kind of taking note of that isn't covered as much in the PowerPoints. But yeah, also listen for the 4 random facts. It's a little bit shorter module, so it probably won't take us quite as long as normal. So they might be a little bit fast and furious. But yeah, listen for those. Take the quiz after that for the lecture, as well as the one for the module. And that's pretty much everything. So let's go ahead and get going. So again, expressing and experiencing emotion, module 32, starting on slide 2. So expressing and experiencing emotions, part 1, detecting emotions in others. The brain detects subtle expressions in reading nonverbal cues and nonverbal threats. Our brain, right, becomes exceptionally good for the most part at effectively reading other people's body language as well as their facial expressions and emotions. So facial muscles are going to reveal emotional signs, even if you don't want them to, right? It's really it generally is going to be showing, like you can go still face and just show no emotion, right? And if you're really good at it and you practice, you can get where you just, like, no one can read you basically. But even then, you're going to have little cues, right? Little signs that you are, little tells, if you will, like to use, like, card playing lingo. There's little things that are going to kind of give away what the emotion actually is, right? A quick little nudge of the eyebrow, or a lift of both eyebrows, or like a flash of a smile, or all those kinds of things give you a quick reading of what's going on inside that person. Deceit, lying, is very difficult to discern. We talked about that a little bit with the polygraph in the last one, right? But there's no actual, like, this is the tell that lets you know that a person's lying. If a person looks up to the side or whatever, that means they're lying. If they're looking at this way, they're trying to remember. That doesn't work. Now, looking up, you are trying to reconstruct a memory, but where you look specifically is going to differ from person to person. So some people will look to the left when they're trying to remember and kind of reconstruct a memory. Other people look to the right. I have a tendency to look to the right. Some people just look straight up, right? Like that. There's no, like, this is, if you do this, you lie. Touching your nose, you don't touch your nose more when you're lying necessarily. It's true that you might become more self-conscious if you're lying, and so there might be a tendency to touch the face more often now, but just me mentioning touch my face and myself touching my face might make you choose to touch your face a little bit more often too, right? There's lots of different things. Also, if you're just a little bit nervous, you might be more likely to touch your face. Okay, so all those little things like that aren't strong. Now, a person might have a tell, quote unquote, right? Like where they touch a certain part of the face when they do tend to lie, but you'd have to know that person as an individual in order to know that trick. Okay. There's an image here, and you can find that image at the bottom of this slide, on slide 2, but you can also find it on page 376. It's basically a series of pictures morphing one from one person, from an expression of anger on the left, your left, anyway, on the left, morphing to a expression of fear on the right. And the center is basically an exact middle ground between anger and fear. Take a glance at that picture and just kind of note for yourself, does that person look more angry or more fearful? What they found, one of the things they found, is that children who have been physically abused are significantly more likely to read that face as angry instead of afraid. And adults who have been physically abused in the past are more likely to read a neutral face as angry rather than afraid or whatever, or just neutral or whatever. And that's partially due to the fact that it is useful to interpret anger, to be overreactive to anger rather than underreactive, because generally speaking, if someone's going to physically be abusing you, it's oftentimes connected to anger, right? So if you read anger quickly, it might give you time to react more efficiently and get out of danger early on. And thus, it makes you more likely to read anger, even if anger isn't actually present. Okay. Random fact number 1 for the day. Sweden has the most islands in the world with 221,800 islands total officially. So a lot of islands in Sweden. Okay. That is a lot of islands. Almost 250,000 islands. 221,000. Expressing and experiencing emotion, part 2, slide 3. Gender, emotion, and nonverbal behavior. On this one, if you want to, there's a little graph. You can find that in the book on page 378. Women generally surpass men when it comes to emotions, which is like, that might be stereotypical, but honestly, it's true. Women are better with emotions than men are typically. They're better at picking up subtle emotional cues. My wife says I am like, basically, I am not good. What's ironic, I'm really good at reading people's body language. And I'm especially good at reading men's body language. And I think this was due actually to my training, both in counseling type of things. I was specializing in helping guys that were dealing with anger and things like that, but also due to my background in fighting. I learned to read body language of men because that's primarily who I was fighting with. Occasionally I have a female sparring partner, but usually it's because they were trying to learn how to defend themselves against a bigger person. I'm 6'10". When I was fighting weight, I was about 225. So generally I was the biggest person in the room. There was one guy that was heavier than me, but for the most part, I was the biggest guy. And so if you could defend against me, you could, for the most part, you could probably defend against most people. So yeah, reading emotional cues, women are generally better at that. Emotional literacy. This is where you have a deeper understanding of emotions, both in yourself and in other people, right? I talked about this in the previous module, I think, where I'm like real comfortable with basic emotions, right? Happiness, anger, sadness, like the basic core language or emotions. I know them well, right? It's when they get nuanced that I begin to struggle. My wife, on the other hand, is exceptionally good at understanding those. And I know them in my head, right? I've read lots of books on them and all this kind of stuff. I'm just not real good at identifying it in myself. I'm actually, ironically, better at identifying it in other people than myself. So it's interesting. It's nice to have somebody that can point that out to you. But anyway, so emotional literacy, that ability to kind of read all those differences. Emotional responsiveness and expressiveness. And this is actually where that graph comes in on page 378 as well as here on the PowerPoint. This was an experiment that they did. They brought several male and female people into a movie. They hooked them up to a thing basically that was reading their physiology while they were watching the movie. And they also recorded their facial expressions. What they found were that the actual experience, like the physiological experience of emotion, as well as the reported number of times they felt emotion, wasn't that much different between males and females. What was different between males and females was how often they showed the emotion physically. Women were much more expressive of the emotions that they were feeling versus men who just kind of stoically were like, sitting there watching the movie instead of actually showing them emotions. Unless you're one of those guys that like, action movie and you're like fighting right along with the hero. But yeah, generally guys just kind of blank out. Expressing empathy, connecting with other people. So guys might feel empathy, but they're less likely to show that empathy. And that seems to be a biological trait. It's pretty universal. Experiencing emotional events more deeply. Women actually do experience emotions at a much deeper level typically. Not always. There are women that have very little emotion. There are men who are just all over the place. But generally speaking, the range of emotional width, if you will, so like let's say this is your happiest and this is your lowest. Okay. Men's range is like the here on average. Women have a bigger range. Now, so there's advantages and disadvantages of that. Advantages, you experience is much higher. Like your happy levels are much higher than most men's are as a woman. On the other hand, a woman's lows are oftentimes much lower than a man's are. And again, that's just kind of universal. It has to do with the hormones and things that are different between the male and the female body. But yeah, that's going to be a normal aspect. And then remembering they remember, because the emotions are more intense, they actually have a better memory connected to the emotions. So if you have, like, let's say you got an argument. If I'm a male and I got an argument with a female, and then a few days later we go back over it, there's a good chance that her memory of it actually will in fact be better than mine. And it's not just because I'm male, right, or whatever, or it's also not because I wasn't paying attention. It's due to the fact that my emotional connectedness to it was lower. Generally speaking, when we experience a higher level of arousal, our memory is stronger, because women have the ability to experience, generally, a higher level of arousal than men do, right? Like, here's their average. The guy comes up here and the girl's up here. Their memory of that event is actually stronger than a man's. So those are all, a lot of things are like stereotypes, but the reality is that research has actually backed up these stereotypes specifically. So yeah, if you get in a fight, if you're a male and you get in a fight with a female and she's like, remember when you said such and such 3 weeks ago? There's a decent chance, even though you probably were like, no, that you did say that. And so you might want to say sorry. But anyway, okay. Now, in areas where there's no or very low emotion, male and female basically they even out memory-wise. So if you're in a low, like you're just having a regular conversation wherever there's not a lot of emotion happening, you probably have equally good or potential at least for equally good memories. But yeah, when emotions get high, women's memories usually are a little bit stronger. Okay, slide 4. Male or female? You can flip back to 377. I'm not sure why they did that in the book compared to the PowerPoint, but anyway, 377, down at the bottom, they have a male or female piece. And basically, before you read the little like light bulb thing on that page, look at those faces. Which one's male and which one's female? Maybe like 5 seconds. Okay, 5 seconds. Likely, right, statistically, the majority of people say that the face on the left is male and the face on the right is female. Okay, why? Now, another interesting thing is this face is actually exactly the same face. It is a gender-neutral face. It's as perfectly gender-neutral as possible. So why would people say that the one on the left is male and the one on the right is female? It's actually the expression being shown. Men are oftentimes experience and express anger more often than women do. So when we see an aggressive look on someone's face, we anticipate that they are likely male. On the other hand, women experience happier moods more often than men and show that emotion more often. And that is why we often will see when someone's kind of got like a slight smile on their face or something, we associate that with the female side of things more often, right? If there's no other markers essentially to let us know that. Okay, random fact number 2. The total spent on adult Halloween costumes each year in America alone, is $1.5 billion on Halloween costumes for adults. That's a lot of money. Okay, slide 5. Expressing and experiencing emotions, part 3. Culture and emotion. So signs across cultures. Crying when distressed, like there are certain emotions that are going to look the same no matter where you go. When you get overwhelmed, crying is a natural response, right? Whether that be sad, the emotion is just like overwhelming. It might be an overwhelming emotion of happiness, and you will experience crying. But if you get too stressed and things like that, crying is basically for your body to release. It's kind of a pressure valve. It releases that emotion well. Shaking the head if you're defiant, you're like, right? It's universal. And even the agreement, the head bob, is universal generally. Smiling when happy, right? All of these things are going to be like, if someone's smiling at you, they may have gotten like a Botox injection and they can't help it, kind of a thing. But generally, a smile, especially a real smile where it enters the eyes and everything, that's going to be a universal sign of happiness. We just automatically do that. And even like the throwing your head back and laughing, that's a universal thing, a sign of true happiness. Facial muscles speak universal language. The degree varies among and within cultures. So how much is appropriate? That does differ from culture to culture, right? In America, for example, we like the extroverted personality, right? We're kind of that individual go-getter and all that kind of stuff. Our whole culture is based around that. And so with that, we like people who show a lot of emotion. People who show more emotion generally are considered more likable, right? So if I'm like, hey, good to see you and all that, right? That kind of like boom, big emotion is preferable. On the other hand, if I go to Japan or South Korea or China or Vietnam or anywhere else in most of Asia, it's considered over the top, right? American emotions are basically like way over the top. There's a tendency to be more introverted in the culture itself in those areas, where extroversion is maybe more prized in America, introversion is more prized in those cultures. And so with that, their emotions are a little bit more subdued, right? Like a small smile might be the equivalent of a big smile in America, right? For the same sign of or the same amount of emotion happening inside the individual. So yeah, it's a universal sign, right? Smiling, universal. How big the smile is, not so much, right? It might be like, or it might be, whatever. So gestures, meaning from vary from culture to culture. Peace sign, this is generally fine now worldwide, but don't do this. If you're in Europe, it's a good way of getting yourself beat. I had an uncle who was in the Air Force, and he was flying. He was a refuel pilot. He actually ran the little spigot thing that comes out of the back of the jet for refueling other jets. And they were flying near Russia, and they had some MiG pilots come up next to him. And the MiG pilot gave him the peace sign, and his buddy who was flying the plane was like, "Look, he's giving us the peace sign, peace, yeah." And the guy, he was like, "That doesn't mean peace, right? This is basically giving you the middle finger if you are in Russia." Same with like this one, A-OK in America, not so much in a lot of places like in South America. This is basically kind of a thing. Rock on, right? Like you do in America, or hang 10. Or rock on, there we go. Rock on in America. If you do this in the Mediterranean area, there's a good chance that you are going to get arrested and or beat. Essentially, you've just called that person's like their current family and all of their ancestry whores. And so you give someone the horns, it's a good chance you're going to get the horns back. So yeah, right. Thumbs up, great. Unless you're in the Philippines, don't do that. That's another one that actually is offensive enough to get you arrested in the Philippines. So, if you're going to travel the world, be aware of what kind of social expressions are okay and what kind are not, and do your best to try to match those. A lot of times you can pull off the stupid American, but we don't necessarily want to be known as the stupid American, right? Do your best to respect where it is that you're going. And that way you don't accidentally offend somebody and or get beat up accidentally. Okay. Facial expressions. So some nonverbal accents provide cultural cues. There are going to be some levels of things that are expected and things like that. Small differences from place to place. But generally speaking, they're more universal. Facial expressions are harder to come up with an individual thing, right? Okay. Before we go to the next one, random fact number 3. A group of rhinoceroses is called a crash, which seems fitting. Think of like what they would do if a whole bunch of them ran into you. Okay, slide 6, culture and emotion. You can find these images also on page 379. It's basically 6 different expressions of emotion. Generally speaking, the vast majority of people are going to get these right? Image A, I'm just going to let you kind of look at it. You can figure it out, right? Image A is happiness. Image B is surprise. Image C is fear. Image D is sadness. Image E is anger. Image F is disgust. And generally, those are going to be recognized worldwide, right? I show a picture of any of these people to anyone around the world, and assuming they can see it, they would generally identify it correctly, right? Now, there are some neural developmental issues that some people might experience where you have a difficult time reading emotion on other people, such as like people who are on the autism spectrum and things like that. But even there, a lot of times, especially with the more obvious emotions where there's not a lot of complexity to it, it's universally recognized even there. Okay. Okay. 7, remember, like most psychological events, emotion is best understood not only as a biological and cognitive phenomena, but also as a social, cultural phenomena. We experience emotion as a heightened state of arousal and or a lower state of arousal, but we also experience it in unison with other people. We can pick up the emotions of other people. And in fact, if we're experiencing empathy with someone, where we are deeply connected, we are generally actually sharing emotions at the same time. You'll even find that heartbeats will sync up when you are really feeling close to a person, like you've met up. That your breathing pattern will generally match up. Your heartbeat will actually sync up with the other person. And so thus we can share emotions with the other people more easily. Okay. All right. Number 8. Slide 8, expressing and experiencing emotion, part 4, the effects of facial expressions. So facial expressions communicate, amplify, and regulate emotion. What you do visibly will affect how you feel, right? In India, they actually started, and it's coming over to America now, but they started these things called laugh groups. People get together who are like maybe struggling with stress or different things, and it's a whole group of people, maybe 100, 200 people, and they'll start artificially laughing, like ha 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 until you actually start really laughing, and you do that for like 30 minutes. You get like 100 people going ha ha ha, and eventually people are going to just start really laughing, right? What's interesting is if you do it long enough, it actually you can feel your body get happier. You can literally fake it till you make it when it comes to emotion. They have found that this is connected to the facial feedback effect, which is the tendency of facial muscle states to trigger the corresponding feelings such as fear, anger, or happiness. They did an experiment in, let's see, in the Kazo Mori. If you look on page 381, they show an image of it. But they took participants and they taped rubber bands basically to the sides of their mouth. And some of the people had it where it went up, so it pulled their face up, right? Some people had it when it went down and pulled their face down. And what they found is that these people, when they had their faces faked like that, the ones that had their faces pulled up felt an overall heightening of mood. They began to feel happier overall. Those that had pulled down began to feel a little bit like down in the mouth. So they started feeling sad over an extended time. So yeah, faking it legitimately can have an effect. They've actually even found that people who get Botox injections, which a lot of times isn't recommended, right? It's basically a toxin, but it removes wrinkles from your face. It also essentially paralyzes your muscles temporarily. Or you're stuck in a smile, right? For a while. You're like, I can't do anything but this. Okay. People who experience severe depression, they've actually, in some cases, recommended Botox injections because it forces the smile. And when your smile is forced, you can't help but start to feel better, ironically, or interestingly. Behavior feedback effect is the tendency of behavior to influence our own and others' thoughts, feelings, and actions. So with this in mind also, what you do is going to be how you feel to some extent, right? If you're feeling angry, you might have heard people say, like, if you're feeling angry, like go punch a pillow or something. That's actually terrible advice. Because essentially, if I'm feeling angry, and then I put my body and my face into physical actions that would correspond with generally being angry, it generally doesn't decrease my anger. If in anything, it actually will likely increase it, right? When I get angry, I don't go and work out on the heavy bag. I take a walk, right? Something slow, something boring. And that can be a very effective way to basically reduce the anger. It also, for one thing, gets me physically away from the thing that's usually making me angry. Whether that be something frustrating that I'm working on, or somebody who's like, just really annoying me at that moment or whatever. If I get up, I'm like, I'm going to go for a walk real quick. I'll be right back. And I'll go for like a little 10, 15-minute walk. By doing that, it allows my body to basically kind of calm down. There's nothing, I could be like walking angrily, I guess, technically, but I'll consciously make an effort to like slow myself down, kind of, meander along. And by doing that, it reduces the feelings of anger. if you're getting in an argument with somebody and you find it feeling like it's getting heated, a lot of times that's actually a good idea. Is take a literal break from each other, take a literal break from the argument, walk away, go for a short walk, breathe deep, slow everything down, and then come back and discuss it after that. And our emotions are going to elevate other people's emotions too. Our physical actions, if I'm like, hey, you're going to feel your body rise up with that. There's a reason why clowns can kind of like amp people up, not to mention that a lot of people find them scary. But like really good clowns who aren't scary really, they're just excellent at that kind of wild craziness. Makes you feel happy. They've learned to basically project emotion outwards so that other people can catch it. Even introverts are going to be likely to catch those kinds of emotions. Okay. So yeah, that is pretty much that chapter in a nutshell, or that module in a nutshell. Final random fact. The Cookie Monster's real name is Sid. So there you go. Like Sid the Sloth, Cookie Monster is also named Sid. So there you go. And with that, don't forget to do the quizzes. Next week, next time, we're going to be looking at modules 33 and 34. So just continuing right along, looking at stress, health, and human flourishing. Basically, how do we like what happens when we go down, and what happens when we get up. And so, yeah, if you want to read ahead, you can do that. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, night, evening, whatever. And I will see you in the next video looking at stress and illness. Until then, have a great day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.